Good morning. I'm Elaine Cozart, and I'm your worship associate this morning. One of my favorite Unitarian Universalist programs is OWL. And for anyone who isn't familiar with this wonderful program, OWL stands for Our Whole Lives and is described as a sexuality education program. It is so much more. I've had the great honor of leading several cohorts of middle and high schoolers here, as well as a group of 4th and 5th graders at our previous church. Why I believe it's so much more is, in addition to learning about sexuality, these kids gain such confidence, and the compassion that they show for each other when we're talking about these really difficult subjects is just, it's amazing. The middle schoolers start in the fall with a lot of nervous energy, but they come out of their shells pretty quickly with a series of getting to know you activities, for the first several weeks. And then they get comfortable with each other, and then we move into topics like puberty and anatomy and physiology, body image, things like that. And the conversations become a lot richer, and they start to really reveal who they are as individuals. And often, these kids express great compassion toward each other, or even if we're doing an exercise where they have to kind of evaluate a situation, they'll express real compassion for just the characters that they're reading and learning about. So my time as an OWL facilitator helped me grow in my relationships with my family and friends, and also with those youth that I got to work with. Some topics really expanded my understanding and empathy for people who were often treated as other. It was during the unit on gender identity a few years ago that we all became familiar with a reality show personality and LGBTQ spokesperson by the name of Jazz Jennings. Jazz is a trans woman who began sharing her story of the challenges of growing up transgender, and her show started when she was 7. It's pretty amazing. According to her parents, she was adamant that she was a girl from the time she could talk, and they were incredibly supportive and did all they could to foster this identity. At about this time, a friend of our eldest child came out as non-binary, and I really believe that these OWL lessons and discussions helped me to show compassion for this young person. Although I couldn't relate, it didn't matter. I didn't need to understand. I just wanted this young person to feel accepted and respected as a human. Several years later, my own child came out as non-binary and now goes by the name Eli and uses they/them pronouns. I have to admit that compassion was not my first reaction. I was filled with a sense of disbelief, not that I didn't believe my kid, but I didn't understand how I didn't know my child well enough to see the signs and for this to make sense, the way that it did for other parents who expressed relief when their kids came out. For them, there was finally an answer for why their child was so uncomfortable in their body. But for me, it was just confusion at first. While Eli was instrumental in schooling us about acceptable language, off-limits questions, and the like when their friend came out, it was all lost on me when it became about my own child. I quickly adopted their new name, but came to realize that my frequent questions were acts of disrespect towards this human that I couldn't wait to bring into this world and I loved so deeply. My child that I wanted to live their fullest, happiest, and best life. Soon, I remembered that it wasn't necessary for me to relate or to understand how or why Eli came to this realization. It wasn't about me or my unspoken expectations and dreams about what their life path would be. This was an awakening for Eli that required, at a minimum, my support. And it was time for me to show compassion for all the discomfort that they had been feeling and for that scary journey that they were walking to come out. Once I did that, I was able to express my joy that they were discovering themselves and who they are. And I'm also able to express my excitement at how their life will continue to unfold. Truly, nothing matters more than Eli's happiness and that they feel loved and supported. Compassion was and is the key.
Our reading today is by Naomi Shihab Nye, a Palestinian-American poet. And this poem is called Famous. The river is famous to the fish. The loud voice is famous to silence, which knew it would inherit the earth before anybody said so. The cat sleeping on the fence is famous to the birds, watching him from the birdhouse. The tear is famous, briefly, to the cheek. The idea you carry close to your bosom is famous to your bosom. The boot is famous to the earth, more famous to the dress shoe, which is famous only to floors. The bent photograph is famous to the one who carries it, and not at all famous to the one who is pictured. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile while crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole. Not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. One of my favorite things to do in the world is something I learned from my mother. When she was younger, she loved to walk on the beach. And when she walked on the beach, she loved to hunt for agates. We just walked along the beach, looking down for the pale rocks that have been distributed by the wind and the waves. I was 55 years old when I looked it up and discovered that my mom's explanation that agates were just quartz rocks that had been around long enough that they turned into agates was completely false. It was Friday that I learned this. According to Jennifer Burns Bright, who wrote the most accessible explanation for this, they were formed millions of years ago in volcanic rock, like the basalt cliffs of the Oregon Coast Range. Sediment in the cavities, under wet changes, under massive pressure and scorching heat, creating chalcedony quartz. When the chalcedony has bands or mineral inclusions in the stones, they're known as agates. As the waves batter the cliffs, chunks of material fall off, and the agates hosted within are weathered down into cobble and smoothed in waves or rushing rivers for longer than we can conceive. No matter how they're formed, searching for them is most successfully done on rocky beaches or in stream or riverbeds. If one looks down and you see a glint, something that looks kind of lit from within, you check it out and you see if you found an agate. What I have discovered in my 50-plus years of agate hunting is the best way to find agates is to look softly, eyes sweeping over the stones and the sand, and wait to see if something catches my eye. The glint of fire or glow will make me pick up something, and then I hold it up towards the sun or the glow through the clouds, because this is Oregon after all. And if it's partially translucent, it is probably an agate, unless it's polished sea glass, which I also love. Most of the agates I find these days are pretty tiny. More people are looking, and the big ones are snatched up quickly, but even the small ones are sweet. This last year, I've hunted for agates, mostly in Oceanside, near Tillamook, where my dad lives. When I go visit him, I usually make it to the beach. It is my happy place. A few months ago, as I was walking there, I was thinking deeply about worship planning. I was trying to figure out what I was going to preach over the fall and winter. I came up with several hopefully good ideas for sermons. And as I collected agates, I hoped to find enough to give one away to everyone here. And I think I managed it. But there are a lot of you today, but I still think I managed it, but that's why the kids went first. As my eyes swept over the stones, I thought about you all. And honestly, I prayed for you all. I know that's a word we don't always use. I trust that when I say it, you will understand what I mean when I say I prayed for you all. I thought about individuals. I thought about who is grieving. I thought about who is caretaking. I thought about who is dealing with a disease. I wondered who is lonely and who might be overwhelmed. I don't know everyone, but still I held you all in love and compassion as I walked along the beach. That technique of looking with soft eyes has so many applications in our daily lives. I've often thought about what we see, what we are looking for. I've often thought about how we see what we are looking for. But if we're so focused on one thing, then we miss the bigger picture. You have to kind of sweep over the rocks to find the agates. Because if you're just looking at like 3 rocks at a time, you're not going to find as many. We've talked about the negativity bias before. The idea that humans are fairly hardwired to respond more to negative occurrences than positive ones. We get a performance review, and rather than focus on the many pieces of positive feedback, we dwell on those couple of pieces of constructive criticism that don't feel very constructive in the moment. I'm guilty of this. My committee on ministry distributed a survey asking for feedback on me as part of my evaluation. 16 folks thought I was doing a pretty great job. 1 person gave me a thoughtful, mixed review, noting some problems and some strengths. 1 person thought that I was awful. And guess which one I can quote? We have a good day overall, but we remember the one bad thing. 99% of drivers are going along on the freeway just fine, and we remember the jerk who swerved around everyone. This happened to me last week. There was a white cargo van that I must have been completely in their blind spot, and they were coming into my lane and did not see me at all. And I did the only thing I could do at the moment, and I just swerved into the next lane without looking. I didn't know who was there. I swerved, and no one was there, and there was a woman in the car behind me in that lane who just, saw the whole thing, and later on she'd moved back in the lane, and she, motioned me over to come back in the lane. She knew I was a little shook. That's who I want to remember. There were and are evolutionary reasons for this bias that we have. It was more important to remember where the saber-toothed tiger hunted than it was to remember where all the pretty birds were. But in our modern world, we've made kind of a religion of this negative bias, and sometimes it hurts us. For example, there are approximately 72 million children and teens living in the United States. Most parents are afraid of someone abducting their child. In our heads, we're not worried about custody interference or kids running away. We're worried about a stranger taking our child. And do you know how many times that happened in the US last year? 350. For those 350 families, that's a horrific and awful thing. But to put it in perspective, 4,000 children drowned last year, and we still take our kids swimming. But let your 9-year-old walk to the park with a friend, and you might get a call from Child Protective Services. It's good to be safe, but it's not good to be terrified. Negative bias keeps us from seeing the good stuff. Yes, inflation has been rising, and interest and mortgage rates are higher than they've been in a couple of decades, but the economy actually grew by 4.9% in the third quarter, which is kind of astounding. I have often warned about letting those people who speak the loudest control the narrative, especially about religion. The people who talk the loudest about Christianity in this country try to argue that Jesus somehow cared more about sexuality and abortion than feeding the hungry or stopping the forces of empire, and that is just flat out not true if you've actually read the book. It's the quieter expressions of faith that we should look for. It's the folks staffing the Hope Food Pantry down at First Baptist. We don't believe everything they do about religion, and that's okay. But we all believe in feeding our hungry neighbors and working together to better our community. Terrible things are happening in the world. There is war, there are invasions, there is poverty, there is homelessness. We have a new Speaker of the House who somehow believes that he was ordained by God for this role. He believes that abortion should be illegal in all circumstances, and that same-sex marriage is an inroad to pedophilia and bestiality. I'm not kidding. I wish I were kidding. There is absolutely enough to worry about, and no amount of soft-focus Vaseline on the camera lens can make that crap any better. And that wasn't the word that I originally wrote. But if we are going to have the courage to keep fighting for what we believe in, for peace and justice and equity, then we are going to have to shift our focus on the rest of it, because we aren't doing the world any good if we're stewing over who cut us off in traffic or stole our parking space. There is evil in the world. There is injustice and greed and systems that benefit the few at the expense of the many. And there are a whole lot of people out there doing the best they can, struggling to get through each day. I got a call from someone last week who was calling the church to see if we could help her financially with her rent and her car insurance. I am able to do things like this because of your generosity to the Minister's Discretionary Fund. I help church members in need, and I also get to help residents of Clackamas County. This woman needed $240 towards her rent and $212 for car insurance. She lost her job last week and has 2 kids. And I asked her what she needed, and she said that she really didn't need the insurance paid because they'd canceled her insurance. So technically, that wasn't showing up. And I said, "Are you still driving? Do you need to drive?" "Yes, I'm sorry." "We can help with that. It's okay." I have a weird job. Sometimes I clean vomit off the patio, and sometimes I get to make somebody's life a little easier and feel like I actually made some tangible difference for a few minutes. Sometimes I worry about the roof, and sometimes I'm planning worship. It's all good. It's all good. But at its core, my job is to help people be more kind, more just, and more compassionate. Now, we don't have to believe that Netanyahu or Trump are doing the best they can. I feel like there is a certain amount of power, and if you have that much power, you have to be held to a higher standard. But what I am asking you to do is to be gentle to the people around you. Look for the good nearby. And honestly, it will make it easier to cope with the crap that is out in the world. Look at your neighbors with soft eyes, flowing gently over the surface, spotting the glimpse of glow. I bet there's some great dogs that live on your block. Learn their names. Learn the names of the kids who live around you or the kids you see here at church. Last week, I went to go see Old Dominion in concert. And there was a big guy sitting right next to us. I mean, he was 6'4" or 6'5" and big. And his partner was 4'11". And after the opening band, I said, hey, I was just wondering if you might be willing to just angle just a little bit. Or, because when you stood, when you leaned on your left foot, we could totally see, and when you leaned on your right foot, we couldn't. And we're all under 5'4" behind you, and how you stand really makes a difference in how we can see. I don't want to ruin your experience at all. And we had a lovely chat. His partner was pregnant, and we talked about all sorts of things, and concert going while short. If I had been afraid to strike up a conversation because he was a big guy drinking a Coors Light, I'd have lost out on a sweet interaction. Not to mention, I would not have been able to see as well. Look for the good. Look for the good all around you. Pay more attention to what is going well than to what is going badly in your immediate surroundings. We do not have saber-toothed tigers around the corner. Become famous to shuffling men smiling as they cross the street, as Naomi Shihab Nye puts it. Become famous to sticky children in grocery store lines as the one who smiled back. There is so much wrong with the world, it's true. But there is so very much more that is right. Sometimes we just don't pay enough attention to it. This week, I invite you to pay attention, to put on your rose-colored glasses, to smile back. In the words of Henry Emile, which I read because it's the tagline on Carol Brownlow's email, life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel the way with us. Oh, be swift to love, make haste to be kind. Blessed be, and amen.